Hi, I'm Chris. I'm remedying my war crimes one video at a time, and last time I talked about SpongeBob's home console debut, SpongeBob SuperSponge. Overall, it was a pretty good time. The gameplay was solid, and it felt SpongeBob-ish enough to be a decent representation of the show for the fans to have fun with. Today, I will take a look at SpongeBob's next-gen debut, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. But not before, some context. This game was released on November 21st, 2002 for the PlayStation 2 and December 18th, 2002 for the GameCube. This game's development is super interesting, as what happened was the French developers Callisto had bought out a company known as Daylight Productions and turned them into Callisto USA. Callisto USA had soon gotten the rights to make a Jimmy Neutron game and the SpongeBob game, and while developing those games, their French parent company had filed for bankruptcy, and as a result, Callisto USA was funneled down into Big Sky Interactive. Development for both Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius and Revenge of the Flying Dutchman was very rocky due to THQ being very hard to work with, and when THQ had offered to buy Big Sky out and they were turned down, THQ blacklisted Big Sky and they soon went out of business. Something that I found out a long time ago was that presumably Callisto France was making this game known as Totem, which was a 3D platformer. It got cancelled, and what happened was the game was retooled into an engine, oddly enough, where the SpongeBob game was made in along with Jimmy Neutron and was apparently used on Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. The engine actually has a very super interesting history that I recommend you check out. I'll put a link in the description. Still, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman was actually released along with a Game Boy Advanced version, which was developed by Vicarious Visions, so I can only tell how much about fucking car crash it is based off that alone. The home console version was received pretty inconsistently based off platform to platform, with the PS2 version getting a 53% from GameRankings and a 4 out of 10 from IGN. It's commonly believed that the PlayStation 2 scores are lower due to the infamous save glitch, which is probably true, but that's for later. Then there's the GameCube version, which got a 72% from GameRankings, a 66 from Metacritic, and a 7.5 from GameZone, and a 6.5 from Nintendo World. Now, after this fucking spoonful of information, let's talk about the game itself. You start the game to legal screens and then the title screen, which weirdly enough did not appear on Dolphin for me for some reason, but once you press start you get to the main menu where you can start the game or look in the extras. There are some pretty neat extras that are present here, like the images from the Pitch Bible, which I think these are actually the images that were on the internet for a long time before the Pitch Bible got fully leaked. But once you start the game, you're introduced to the story, which is when SpongeBob wakes up and goes to play fetch with Gary, and he brings back a crate that says Danger, Donut Open, or Elsie. He opens it despite Gary's winning, and inside is a little bottle. SpongeBob strokes it like it's a fucking veiny penis, and then the Flying Dutchman comes out. The Flying Dutchman says he'll take him away to work on his ship for eternity, but then SpongeBob blames Gary, and the Flying Dutchman says you'll take Gary instead. A bit later, he does come and take Gary away, but since he's working so well on the ship, he decides to take away SpongeBob's friends one by one. In order to get them back and weaken his power, you have to collect his treasure, which is hidden all around Bikini Bottom. Something I really like about this game is that instead of using Plankton as the main villain, they use the Flying Dutchman, which I think is cool because he's very underutilized in a lot of stuff. Anyways, after you leave SpongeBob's house, you're greeted to Bikini Bottom, which reveals something about this game. This is the first time where SpongeBob was put into a free-roaming, third-person 3D world. For some future context, this is the most common SpongeBob game from this point. Things like Battle for Bikini Bottom and the movie game only corroborate this point too. However, this is the first game that ever tried to do something like this, bringing the characters into a truly 3D world and trying to actually make them feel alive in a sense. And how does it fare? Well, for one, the controls feel pretty good for the most part. SpongeBob is a bit floaty, but I feel like it really fits him, and also, he's not too floaty to the point in time where this feels like a Kirby game. His moveset does have some issues, like how he can't ledge grab, which sucks, but there is also this roll that doesn't do anything, but it is pretty funny, so that's cool, I guess. Another pretty cool thing you can do is that when you press the Y button, the game goes in first-person mode. While you can't move like this, it still is pretty cool seeing the game from this perspective, and it also lets you see some pretty cool looking shots, all things considered. Anyways, the main point of the game is getting these letter tiles that are scattered across all levels that spell out SpongeBob's name. You get these tiles via platforming throughout the levels, and there is a pause menu that shows you what tiles you do and don't have yet. Once you get on the letter tiles, SpongeBob starts, what the fuck? He decides to spin around like a fucking madman, and you decide to do a tile puzzle that's inside of his head. Once you do the tile puzzle, you get transported back out of a level, and you go find a treasure chest and a special outfit that has the Flying Dutchman's treasures. One thing that this game does differently than any other SpongeBob game is that it has a costume system that actually impacts the the gameplay. So there are 4 different costumes throughout the game, and you get them all at different points. You start out with the regular SquarePants costume, where the biggest pro is that it has a regular melee attack. You unlock the Mermaid costume in the construction area in downtown Bikini Bottom after getting past with a bag of Krabby Patties, and the main thing this can do is throw water balls. No joke, off the top of my head, this was useful in like 2 levels, but at the same time 2 is bigger than 0. You get the Reef Blower and Jellyfish fields after getting Rusty 100 Jellyfish, and it does exactly what you think a Reef Blower would do. It pushes stuff. Honestly, it could have been a cool gadget for like platforming stages, but nah, it was only used in like 2 levels, just like the Mermaid Man costume. And finally, you get the fucking dreaded Jellyfishing costume of Notre Dame in Bikini Bottom. Okay, so the way you switch for the costumes is going through these changing tents that are scattered throughout the levels, and the biggest issue with the costume system is sheerly how unbalanced it is. For most of this game, you will be playing as a Jellyfish costume SpongeBob, and the problem with that is that the game's music is based off the costume you're in, so for most of the game, you will be listening to the same 2 minutes of calm jellyfishing music. 3 hours of that. 3 full hours of that. That is a fate no fucking man should have to endure. And then you get to the game's combat, which is, like, really fucking bad. For the most part, the enemies sort of just roam around the map, and they don't really try and attack unless you come up to them. Pro tip, you should just let the enemies exist, because if you do, unfortunately, decide to engage with combat with them, it's gonna end up like this. You just hit the enemies like 2 to 3 times and they end up fading away. They can attack back, but it will all be so stilted and fucking boring and awful. Another thing is that since this game doesn't have power-ups, there's no spice to the pretty bland combat. Like, overall, the combat system is by far the worst thing about Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. But there are 7 worlds in this game, with those being Bikini Bottom, Downtown Bikini Bottom, Sandy's Tree Dome, Jellyfish Fields, Chum World, Goo Lagoon, and the Dutchman's Graveyard. The levels themselves vary in size, like Bikini Bottom and Sandy's Tree Dome are pretty small, while Chumboil and Downtown Bikini are more medium-sized, and Goo Lagoon and the Dutchman's Graveyard are large. Granted, there are some sub-areas that you have to count into, but even then, I still stand by what I said. Truthfully, the platforming in most of these levels is pretty fun. Don't get it twisted, there's nothing groundbreaking about this game, but there are some pretty fun segments, like the top of Sandy's Tree Dome, where you have to go through the tree and destroy the hive. Chum World has this little segment where you get to the top of this acrobatic slicker show, and most of the Dutchman's Graveyard is the best level in the game. Granted, there are some levels in this game which are less than stellar, like Jellyfish Fields and most of the Goo Lagoon, other than the pier segment, because that was actually pretty fun. Chum World has this ball rolling segment where you use the Reef Blow to roll a ball up the hill, and weirdly, the GameCube version has a different way of handling physics than the PS2 version. For the most part, you will not even realize it because this game does not rely on the physics engine like that, but this segment in Chum World can genuinely be the worst thing ever, because the ball can be so hard to like actually roll up the hill. Then there's the PS2 version, which does not have this issue at all, and it's really easy to get the ball to go up, and that makes me think that the PS2 version was supposed to be the main version of this game. The PS2 version actually seems like a far more well-crafted game than the GameCube version, as the lighting is way better and the physics are way better as well. However, the PS2 version also has the infinite save glitch, which actually is the reason why that game scored so low. Apparently, Sony had a policy where games could not take more than 6 seconds to load, and to circumvent this, Big Sky used a soft reset trick. However, the trick ended up becoming outdated on future models of the PS2 and it only ever really worked on the old fat models like the one I have. As a result, the game could commonly freeze around the areas where it needs to do the trick, and it could also crash, which could corrupt your save file. Imagine being at the end of this 3.5 hour game and it crashes and deletes all of your data. Me personally, overall, while the level design and platforming does have some issues, I feel like this is what the game has the most going for, and I feel like it is pretty fun in general. There are also these weird pseudo boss fights where you get into a karate attire and break boxes. There are 3 of these throughout the game. 2 of them are with Sandy, and 1 of them are with Larry for a letter tile in the Goo Lagoon. These fights are alright, I guess. They're like super easy to beat and they're not even fun, but it's not outright bad. There's only 1 real boss fight throughout this whole game, and it's with the Flying Dutchman. You go to a ship where you free all your friends, but they don't really seem to care that they were taken away. Also, they are kind of just like Yeah. In the fight, you can dodge his attacks, which include him coming through the floor and shooting fire at you, and also his weird skeleton people. Once you get through the attack phase, you pick up bombs and throw them at him, and once you throw 3 bombs at him, he gets sucked back into the battle and you escape on one of his ships. Look, it's still a pretty easy boss, but compared to all the other fights in this game, it's actually pretty fun. And then there's the graphics, which, how do I put this? Character models can be very interesting, as Patrick looks like he's just happy to be here, and Plankton looks like he's upset to even exist. For some goddamn reason, they based Mr. Krabs' model off the stock art, so that adds another point to the counter. SpongeBob himself actually looks pretty good, as he looks a lot more season 1-ish, and I think it's cool that a model represents that time period of the show. And then there's the environments, which do not look like how they do in the show. Your Lagoon looks like a chemical wasteland, and downtown Bikini Bottom looks like fucking Detroit. Imagine that in the show. What the fuck is that? The modelers for this game took some liberties and made Bikini Bottom and Jellyfish fields feel more video game-ish. Sure, they don't look exactly like how they did in the show, but you can still tell what is what. The game itself actually looks a whole lot darker on the GameCube than PS2 for whatever reason. Overall, the game just looks kind of alright, I guess. Then there's the music, which does not sound bad on its own. The music always feels very SpongeBob-ish and shouldn't feel out of place because of that, but since you're always in this costume, be prepared for nothing but fishing music. The game also got everyone to surprise the roles, sort of. Everyone is here, somehow even including Clancy Brown, but the French narrator is voiced by someone who is not Tom Kenny, and it wouldn't be an issue if the narrator would learn how to shut the fuck up, but he always keeps talking. The game's sound effects and voice audio also sounds kinda strange. It reminded me of all the weird audio in Season 4 where it all felt loud but wasn't. Here's my attempt to try and replicate what it sounded like. Also, yes, I made a cardboard cutout thing, and I will be using it in more videos. Overall, the presentation in this game is like everything else in it. It's very hard to dissect and analyze. That actually leads me greatly into the next point, the game's very odd vibe. This game feels so fucking strange, man. Everything from the game's dialogue sounding like it was mixed inside of a fucking trash can to the very odd take on the show, and how the game also feels very empty towards the end. It feels very different from any other SpongeBob game due to all of that, and truthfully, I think that's kind of cool. This game deadass has a fucking Playboi Carti type aura around it, which is something I cannot say any other SpongeBob game has. Actually, on the topic of Playboi Carti, have y'all heard his new album? That shit was fucking ass. But still, this game has a very distinct feeling from any other SpongeBob game, and I think that's pretty cool. I genuinely think that while this might not be the best SpongeBob game, it sure as shit is the most unique. Overall, this game is pretty good, and it's not the singular best SpongeBob game, let's get that clear, but when compared to the other two and some of the future SpongeBob games, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman is one of the best SpongeBob games. It does have a lot of issues, but most of them boil down to nothing more than minor inconveniences, and its pros heavily outweigh its issues, especially if you choose to emulate it so you don't get the save glitch. So far in the ranking, I'm putting it in first place, and in the tier list, it's going in A tier. If you're a fan of SpongeBob, go play this game, it's a genuinely fun time. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. This video is the first one I made where I actually used my own gameplay footage because I got the little watermark removed. I have a cool little website that has some cool information on it, like stuff about a cancelled third Fairly OddParents game. I also have a very inactive Discord, so join that server so we can all actually start talking. Next time I will talk about the one, the only, Battle for Bikini Bottom, so please subscribe to catch that. Until next time, this has been Good Sack signing out. Let's see ya.